Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your guest host, John Bird. I'm happy to welcome Lenny Murphy, who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to go for it. So in his career, Lenny has founded 9 companies and played a leading role in guiding many more as part of their executive teams. He's an advisor to 17 companies, many of them startups, a board member of several academic and NGO organizations, a consultant to many brands and supplier organizations, and a facilitator of partnerships and investments, and a very sought-after speaker globally. He is the editor of the GreenBook Blog, which is the most read industry blog in the world, and the event series he produces, IIEX, has grown to become one of the top 5 industry events in the world. Little plug, it's May 24 and 25 in Austin. Hope to see you there. The Grit Report is the most read and cited strategic planning document in the insight space. Lenny, I've heard you say it's the nuts and bolts of the industry, but I literally get it. I open it up, I go through it, kind of make it applicable to me. It's just it's a great resource for us in planning. So welcome to the show, Lenny.
Oh, thanks, John. My marketing team wrote that intro. That's the first time I've heard it read.
You're turning red. It's excellent.
Yeah, I know. I'm blushing a little bit. I mean, it's. I guess it's all true. It's just, I don't normally hear other people tooting my horn, and I try not to do it too much myself. Anyway, it's great to be here. So thank you.
So most of our listeners are pretty familiar with the GreenBook and the work you do in the industry, but it would be great if you could just kick it off with a general overview.
Yeah, well, so GreenBook actually has been around for 60 years. A lot of people assume that we
wow.
Started by the New York AMA. So it literally used to be a green book. It was a directory of.
Yeah, I remember the GreenBook. I remember when we get the GreenBook in the mail.
Yeah, you would get the Green Book. A series of events back in 2008. I found myself kind of wondering what do I do now, and knew the folks at GreenBook. They said, "Why don't you do some consulting for us?" And that began his journey of where it is today. That it truly is a marketing platform for the insight space. That is its core business. It looks a lot more like a media company than anything else. There is a directory, but also we put on events, we publications. There's the blog, which is actually changing now, even as we speak, from not being a blog as much as it is just a content center. We've also had the opportunity to create some spinoffs. So Gen 2 Advisors, consulting arm, because as we were doing all these things and I was doing the Grit Report and we're learning all these things, people said, well, can you consult with us? And that GreenBook was not a good organization to do that with. So we created another company, Gen 2 Advisors. There's a few startups that we've done. One, Savio, which is a talent marketplace that is now a standalone company as well, and Veriglyph, which is our play around seeing blockchain. So it's been a cool journey to be able to make an impact for buyers and suppliers on, because that's really all that a marketing platform is, connect supply and demand, and that's what we've done. Everything else is just channels and ways to help augment that, and it's a cool ecosystem. I'm blessed to have had this journey for the past 12 years now of working with that team and making some really cool things happen.
Oh, that's amazing. It's amazing. It's been 60 years. I wonder if I could dig up an old GreenBook out of my bookshelf. But thanks for sharing that. So one of the newest projects you're working on is the 23 Grit Report, Insights Practice Report. I believe that's probably the most significant thing we're going to talk about today, but I kind of love to get your perspective at a high level about what you see as interesting and really what excites you about this year's Grit Report.
Yeah, so we just published, I guess about 2 weeks ago. Grit is, so you may appreciate this. I'll share this with the audience. So I started what was then the Research Industry Trends Report. That's how I met the team at GreenBook back in 2003. Really as an internal competitive tool I was with a company called Dialtech, and it was the advent of online research. Dialtech was an IVR based company, and we were wondering, well, what's this online stuff going to do to our business?
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And I was like, well, I mean, we're a research company, let's ask, right? So we created this little report that we sent out to the industry, asking people, various things, and people, and the incentive was, and we'll share the data with you, right? And it just kind of grew from there, and has changed an awful lot in all that time. So today we really are proud that it is a tool that folks use. I get asked to do presentations all of the time with boards and with investors, and we see it cited all over the place. And there's two waves. So we just published the insights practice version, and that is kind of the nuts and bolts, where we try and track methodology adoption, drivers of supplier selection, what's happening kind of in the trenches with the space, on both the buyer and the supplier side. And then the one that we'll be fielding here soon is the business innovation report, and that has the Grit 50, and we're trying to take more of a macro view, right, of other industry dynamics. But this one, this is the one that I get the most excited about, really, because it's where we see kind of the rubber hits the road on how the function is changing, and where technology that presses my geek button, right, which things are getting lots of attention. And so to your point, what your question, what jumped out on this one? The industry has completed its transformation to being a tech-led industry. It just is. So it's the healthiest subsegment. It is where all the growth comes from. We look at it as really there's a spectrum. There's 2 points, and there's technology-led at one point, and there is service-led at the other. But it's a little more subtle than that, because what it really is there's technology-led at the one point, but service-driven, and that takes up a big chunk of that spectrum, and service-led but technology-driven at the other. And everyone's kind of clustering somewhere in the middle in that jockeying for position. But what they all have in common is that technology is a driver. And when we think about technology, it's everything, like companies like InfoTools, right? Visualization and reporting, that's a huge priority. We see lots of investment dollars flowing there, but also data collection. And we track, the adoption of data collection technologies all the way from, good old fashioned Katie. We still track that to, AI. Now, all that said, and that's an important point. These data were collected in November. Before
Has anything happened since then?
Yeah. So we're actually retooling the next wave, the business innovation report, because we now need to understand. We would have normally talked about AI adoption in this one, but we missed the boat. Timing just didn't work out that way. So we're going to factor that into the next one, because it has been a game changer in so many ways. And that does dovetail into one of the other major findings that is I think it's because of technology. On the buyer side, the insights function is highly decentralized now. We could even call it fragmented. If we look at the business issues, advertising tracking, brand, product, et cetera, those are not centralized within the insights group. They're all over the place. And I think that democratization or fragmentation of the insights function has largely been driven by the accessibility of tools that do lots of great things for folks without the need to have an in-depth education in market research overall. John, you've been around this industry as long as I have, so there's probably a part of you that hates hearing that, even as I hate saying it. But it is the reality. It has leveled things up quite a bit and allowed non-professional researchers to conduct professional level research, at least in terms of of data collection. And now with the advent of ChatGPT, it's going to be interesting to see where things go from here. So
yeah, I could see. So it's really is tech. I mean, in our space, we're trying to enable companies to use technology to make their lives easier. So it sounds like you're saying a little bit of that. I mean, I'm a brand manager. I can go on and run a study pretty easily. I don't necessarily need to get a researcher involved, but I still feel we're still crossing that chasm of, as a marketing person with zero background in market research, truly capable of conducting market research. And, there's obviously issues and challenges. I'm kind of curious in your perspective. I feel like we're going to get there where anybody can do market research if we can control the content.
Yeah,
but I still feel like it's a ways away.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. There's a lot of crap research that happens. Right? We've all seen it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like giving guns to kids. We've got to be careful with what we do. It can be dangerous. And there's lots of mistakes. I mean, good Lord, I can look at almost daily at this point. Marketing.
Oh, we've all got a story.
Yeah. But I mean, so I see out in the public, like, really? I don't think your insights group did the research to support this, right? I think you may have missed the boat on some of these things. But go ahead.
I still feel like it's kind of that continue. I mean, people are always talking about quality, and it's like, well, quality is kind of a continuum, right? If you and I need to figure out, hey, how many people are coming to our party, and should we have 12-ounce beer cups or 16-ounce beer cups? That's a pretty simple thing to do. Or if I'm deciding, I need to build a plant that's going to produce beer cups, I mean, that's a much bigger decision. So the quality, it's a different example. So I think there's a lot of tools out there that are enabling, quick pulses, which, we used to do at my day, the Greenfield Online. We do these really quick pulses to understand, what's going on in the market. But more strategic things, probably landed with whatever the companies were called back then, but Ipsos and TNS and Miller Browns of the world, right? So there's still those big strategic studies. But I mean, you look at the Grit report, that's a very big and strategic study, and you fielded it, and things changed just in the last couple of months. So
sure.
I'm impressed we really haven't talked about ChatGPT, but I think we're going there. Do you feel, I would love your perspective on that, because you're always a leading indicator of what's going to happen and kind of what's cool in the research space. And I heard you in a podcast say, oh, that's cool. And then like, oh no, it's kind of like, it's really cool, but it's like, I can see it being misused. It's, but balancing it. And market researchers were kind of worriers. So I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, I think
on generative AI and ChatGPT.
Sure. No, I'm happy to pontificate, as anybody who knows me knows. And this really has been a hot topic across the board. So I've spent a lot of time talking to people and finding out what's going on. And I've actually recently come to the realization, and I never thought of it this way before, but a big part of my job is really conducting informal IDIs all day long. So, how
does that make you feel?
Yeah. I'm not just I don't just play a researcher on TV, right? I actually am one. So it circles back around the previous point, right? What drove this democratization and what defines quality? And I think you're absolutely right. The more tactical the business issue is, the more it lends itself towards automation. In the big bucket concept of automation. The more strategic the business issue is, the more complex it is, and the less it lends itself towards automation. That said, there's a spectrum, right? Data collection, sample, visualization, a lot of those things, regardless of whether it is a tactical or a strategic business issue, just create real efficiencies across the board.
Yeah.
What we hadn't gotten to yet was the ability for technology to create customized questionnaires or guides, and generative AI does do that. Now, I'm not saying that they're ready for prime time as soon as they come out, but they're pretty darn good, and they certainly save time, right? And I know many companies that are utilizing that right now. The create a questionnaire, boom, and it does it. here's my question, and it will create that, and then you just tweak it as needed. So that, in terms of efficiency of process, of time, and of the human labor element, that's a big damn deal. And on the flip side, on the back end is, and this as well as anybody, through info tools, managing unstructured data, that nothing has to date really replaced human coding, right? A human still needed to oversee and do these things. That is not the case now, right? I mean, you can hand this thing an entire transcript or a whole, verbatims, and ask it to summarize it, and it does it right. Pretty darn good. And to summarize the concepts out of a report, and it will do it. So it's not perfect, and by no means do I think that it's going to replace. It doesn't replace the role of researchers, which in my opinion ultimately has always been to understand why and what's next, right?
Yeah.
That's
understanding the business issue and what tools you need to answer it, what data sources you need to answer. I think it's just another tool in our toolbox. I mean, the calculator probably sent shivers down some industries, right? And here we are.
Right.
Online market research. It was we still do phone, and we still get data, collected by mail, which is that thing that goes in that box in the front of your house. For those of you not as old as I am, but it's interesting. I mean, it really depends on the design of the study and what you're trying to answer.
It does. So, and I think ultimately it just means, so this does relate to the most recent GRIT findings. We've been asking a question for the last, I think, 5 years. We call it the day in the life of a researcher. And what we wanted to understand was, is technology changing how people spend their time on a daily basis, right? The tasks that they perform. And the answer is no. There's been no change, none. What did change was throughput, was bandwidth, right? People were doing more of the same things because technology enabled them from an efficiency standpoint to do that. But the advent of generative AI, I think, will change that. I think it will change because more tasks are automated. It's not just a function of throughput. It's not an engineering problem anymore, right? It will force people to spend more time doing different things than they normally do. I hope that is adding value, thinking about the why and the now what. But that also is a sea change for the industry. It won't be for those companies already situated as consultants, right? And those full service firms that have taken that deeper subject matter expertise and that opinion, they will be fine. But for those companies that are still just kind of caught up in, really field services, fundamentally field services, I think that they're going to have a problem adapting, and it has their implications for bottom line, top line, labor. It has wide-ranging implications that we are just beginning to get a glimmer of.
So, when you look at, kind of focusing back on GRIT, when you look at kind of trends, what are businesses really trying to tackle? What are the issues that they're trying to tackle? Is it simple, grow my business? Is it back to cheaper, faster, better?
Yes.
All the above.
It always is cheaper, faster, better, always. Or actually, what GRIT tells us is that it is better, cheaper, faster, right? That is the ranking order. Quality comes first. Speed. So my colleague Karen Lynch actually pointed out, and I thought it was a great observation from the data, that speed has kind of declined a little bit in importance, which means we've kind of gotten there already, so we've set the table stakes and everybody's doing okay on delivering on the speed. So now it's a function of cost and quality that are really driving things. But ultimately, for the client, it's what's the answer to the business question? That's it. And how do I communicate the answer to that most efficiently and effectively to the key stakeholders? And that's the world that you live in, right?
Right.
So that's why we continue to see visualization and storytelling and those things as high areas of priority, because we haven't gotten it right yet on communicating those things effectively. And that's also why I think generative AI has an impact there. It is good at communicating things. It is good at summarizing things. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
I always think of it as the three-legged stool, the bigger, faster, cheaper. But on my side of the fence, I see, speed to insight is still pretty important. I mean, we're in the reporting space, so it's, how do we get results right after we come out of field? It's, so that whole data processing piece is pretty big. We're also seeing a lot of, on the better side, it's the, hey, I've got a business problem, but I need to answer it with sales data, survey data, social data. And how do I do that? And then being able to easily access that and share it across the company so that, production has a good understanding of the data they need to see. Lenny at the C-suite has his information he needs. So it's, I hate that old term, the right data, right place, right time, and I can't remember how it goes, but it kind of is true. There's so much data out there. How do you cull it down to the information production needs, the information the CEO needs, and making sure you're taking care of folks? There was another really interesting thing I saw in the GRIT report was around picking vendors and suppliers and how it's kind of gone from relationship to reputation, and it seemed like it was a pretty big jump. It went from, it's now 43% reputation versus 37% relationship, and that's people that are looking to buy market research. I thought that was really interesting because you've been around a while, I've been around a while. It's always been a relationship business. What do you think it is that's driving the change to reputation?
I think it's that phenomenon they were talking about earlier of the fragmentation of the insights function. That gives it a negative connotation. That's really, I don't think it's the right word. As the insight function is diffused, that's a better way to put it, across the different areas within the enterprise, you lose internal knowledge, right? So the folks that had that relationship will now all of a sudden the product team is in charge of doing UX testing. They don't have those relationships already in place, right? They haven't worked for 10 years with user testing or whatever company. They don't know who to call, so they need to find that there's other factors in determining who they should work with. So they know, for instance, they know to go to GreenBook, right? And there's a bunch of vendors there. We'll find who we need to talk to in GreenBook. Once you're there, how do you figure that out? So, right, how do you differentiate between the good ones and the bad ones? And that's overly simplistic, but it's the rating and reviews culture, right? So I know my wife, she that's the first thing she looks at. It's actually always an argument with us. So when we're looking at whatever, I go straight to price, right? And she goes straight to reviews. And so there's a different decision criteria as new decision makers participate in the process. They have a different criteria that can't be dependent just upon relationships, because those relationships are no longer centralized.
It's interesting because our industry does I feel like companies on the corporate side, they centralize, decentralize, centralize, decentralize. And your point is we're decentralizing. And then it's like, oh my gosh, we have so much information and we don't have a central knowledge base. I just wonder if history, if we're looking backwards, we'll say it will re-centralize. And we've all got, I've got stories of, a company doing the exact same research in two different groups.
Right.
And it's crazy, right? So it's I guess it's kind of a risk. It's if technology is enabling the brand manager to answer the what color should the handle be question, that's tactical. They can go out there and do that, but there's no central repository necessarily of red handles are the best handles.
Sure. But I think that's a different question, though. So I agree with you 100%, John. But I think that's a kind of a tactical thing. So obviously, data synthesis, data integration, those continue to be large areas of interest and investment. And so I think people get that, right? But there's a lot of waste in a decentralized organization. So there's a lot of duplication. And to your point, obviously, you guys, the kind of the knowledge management platforms that,
like Knowledge Hounds.
Knowledge Hound, all those guys, Market Logic, all those guys. They've been trying to tackle that problem. I mean, hell, just like, on my hard drive, right? I know where everything is, and I can search and I can find that information, because I know it was there. I know I have a proposal from 1998 that whatever, but and I do think that is a part of this, to go back to talking about generative AI and ChatGPT, but that's one thing that does really, really well. So is to centralize. It's not even about centralizing. It's anywhere within the enterprise to identify the right information, to pull it out and to make it accessible. I mean, it's search on steroids, right? It can summarize that.
Now I can envision it. I mean, almost like a Google page where you search, but then it comes back and says, with a certainty of, with the confidence level of X, here's your results. Or, hey, we did this study in 1865. It might not, purple might not be the right handle color anymore. I think it's interesting. But I do feel that things get so decentralized. I had a client many moons ago at a prior employer, but we ran their brand and their customer satisfaction programs. And their brand study started to take a nosedive on likelihood to recommend, which they had to have in their brand study. And the customer satisfaction and the brand groups were completely siloed. They didn't see each other. But we ran both those studies, and we could see in the customer satisfaction that their graphics card was catching on fire, and for some reason people don't like their graphics cards to catch on fire, and they're not likely to recommend a laptop when it catches on fire. So I thought it was pretty interesting. But the two different groups refused to accept the other person's information, which I thought was interesting, which really drove me on my quest to, how do you pull multiple sources of data together, which is kind of sort of where I am. Yeah. So if we were to drill down further into like data integration, are there any trends you're seeing with data integration that might be interesting, or did anything come out of Grit that talked about how companies are combining multiple sources of data? So, what buyers are looking to integrate?
Yeah, so Grit didn't dive into that level of how are you doing it, who are you using, what tools. Right. So we don't dive into that. It's certainly it has been a trend for a while. That is and if we look at that from an investment focus standpoint, and that's one of the categories we continue to see high levels of investment energy going into from both buyers and suppliers. So it's a priority. But I do know anecdotally. So this is one of the benefits of, go back to GreenBook. We also have Gen 2 advisors, right? And so in that role, we do a lot of work with brands, and we also do a lot of work with suppliers in an advisory consulting capacity. And currently, there are 3 Gen 2 engagements with large global companies. I'll just kind of leave it at that. That asks to help as they think through their innovation strategy across the insight function, right, going forward. And I know that this is a perpetual conversation with them, is how to connect the dots, right? And it's one of the areas that we look at tools like Info Tools, Knowledge Hound, Market Logic, right? All of you guys, and say, here's what that stack looks like, right? Depending upon what you need to do to create that centralized, not just repository, but asset of information, and how to empower the enterprise to be able to utilize that in a variety of ways. Because to your point, there's different organizations that have within the company that have different needs, but they don't want to miss the synergy. They don't want to miss the opportunity to say, oh, wait, there's another, element here that maybe there's a signal that we need to catch from a satisfaction level that our brand and product guys need to know. So it is an ongoing topic. And it is one that people are really paying attention to and trying to bridge the gap. And there's also companies that have done that really, really well. I mean, P&G, I think they famously have these, they call them data rooms, right? I think they call them war rooms, actually.
War rooms.
Yeah. Throughout their campuses where you can walk in and there's every metric that matters is available to dive into, and they've utilized a variety of solutions to get there. Unilever's done the same thing. Coke a few years ago,
Data lakes and all.
Yep. They shifted everything to a focus on analytics, where they called it their data machine, right? This internal system that was developed. They just took all the information coming from every available source and to make that available to the analytics team. So it continues to be a big deal. And I see there's nothing that indicates to me that that's going to go away. But I would challenge again that there is, it gets back to, yay, we've got all this data, but what does it mean? I mean, obviously some things are just KPIs and, NPS scores, all that stuff, right? That's easy. But the other stuff, what do we do with it? So what does this really mean? And I think that, and here's where I think it really makes me excited for the future. In 2020, every brand in the world had that, oh crap moment, right? I mean, we all had that personally, but brands did too, of like, whoa, wait a minute. Our norms don't matter anymore, right? That we can't rely on our benchmarks. Everything has changed, and it did. So, and yes, maybe they didn't change wildly in some categories, but in many, it was truly a black swan event. And who did they go to try and understand what was happening? Us, our industry. We were the ones that were asked to step up and deliver on that, and we did, and we earned our seat at the table. And now we just can't rest on our laurels. We have to continue to think about if every day is kind of a new black swan event, and sometimes it feels that way to me. I don't know about you. What? I didn't see that coming. We need to not get so caught up in the process. That's important, but the process is there. The technology is there to enable us to answer a business question and give good guidance. So ultimately, that's what we need to stay focused on, in my opinion, is what empowers us to give good guidance. And it's not just about, a bar chart.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I was asked a great question. I would love to ask it of you, and I'm going to put you on the spot. But looking at the Grit report, there's so many companies with layoffs in the market research. I mean, not just market research, but I mean bigger companies having big layoffs, Facebook, Google, et cetera, Meta. For those looking for work in market research, where would you point them? I mean, I would be like, maybe don't go into data processing, but go into higher level business solutions or listening to business problems and solving. Just kind of curious about your perspective.
Yeah, well, it's probably not a bad thing to learn prompts right now to become a prompt engineer. That seems like a pretty in-demand skill. Agreed. I don't think, I'm on the board of two of the Master's Market Research programs, both Michigan State and UGA. So sorry, guys. I don't think that there's a hell of a lot of value in we need to understand how to write a good questionnaire. We need to understand data structure. We need to understand analysis. We do need to understand those things. We can't know enough just to be dangerous, right? We do need a good foundation in the basics. But the days of being paid for 40 hours a week of work of creating tabs, there's probably not a long future in that. Coding, probably not much of a future in that, right? So I do think that it is, we need to understand how to do it, not dismissing any of that, because we need to understand how things work. But higher level, creating business impact. I think that is where I would spend more of my time. If I was going through that process right now, I'd be looking at how do I get a job with McKinsey, even though I really want to work for Kantar, right?
Right.
And if you're kind of thinking through that skill set, that's probably going to get you in a pretty good direction, while also knowing how to write a good prompt.
Well, it's like curiosity. I feel like our industry, if you're not curious and don't find data fun, you're kind of in the wrong spot. And Einstein famously said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 50 minutes defining the problem, which is true. I think in our industry, we're very quick to say, oh, you want to sell more? Okay, we'll figure that out. Like, before we really define what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
Okay, Lenny, so I'm going to ask you to pull out your magic, like, super crystal ball and kind of do a off the record projection for the future. What do you think is going to happen in the next year or two?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier. I said, yeah, I'm really good at predicting what's going to happen. I suck at predicting when it's going to.
That's totally fair.
I've been way too early in lots of businesses. Then 10 years later it becomes a thing. Oh, anyway. Yeah. So I think I think we will continue to be riding uncertain times economically, and that's important because obviously it impacts business, but it also creates a lot of opportunity. And so John, you mentioned greenfield, so you lived through the first major wave of consolidation, right? We're entering another wave of consolidation right now, driven by the cycle of economic uncertainty, meaning value buys, right? You can get companies cheaper right now because they have a lower valuation than they did a few years ago. Not because they perform badly, just because the economy is different. And that will spur, we'll go through this wave of consolidation, and we'll, Ipsos will continue to be Ipsos, but we will see a challenger to Ipsos emerge, right, through consolidating companies like Ipsos did. So that's one thing, and that will probably accelerate this year. And that spectrum I talked about earlier, right? That it's going to morph into a really messy Venn diagram. So the service companies and the tech companies are going to just cluster more and more towards the middle. And there's going to be very few pure play tech companies and very few pure play service companies as we go through this process, because it's going to be looking for the synergies between the two. So that's kind of the macro view.
Sounds so gloom and doom. I always think of bad times are like perfect times for researchers, because if you think about the successful companies that have kind of spawned out of bad times, a lot of that's driven by people like you and I hope, that think creatively and like, hey, this is a problem, we can solve it, and they come out of it very, very strong. And then there's the other companies that completely cancel all market research because it's that, it's just kind of a nice to have.
Yeah, well, I think that's there. I don't think I'm being gloomy. I'm looking at it from a realistic standpoint, because we've been through it a couple times.
Yeah.
Right? History doesn't always repeat, but it damn sure rhymes, right? So so I think that we'll see that happen, and that will spur another wave of innovation, because that's what we've seen happen. We've seen these kind of peaks and valleys, and that will create lots of opportunities for lots of people. And what will those technologies look like? Because they'll probably be technology centric. It'll be, obviously we'll play off of the generative AI and all those things, but who knows what else that's going to unlock, right? I think there's lots of opportunities that will emerge that will be really exciting and interesting. It may be challenging for some, be awesome for others, but that's life. That's my story. I've been through those ups and downs. I'm sure you have too. So that'll just continue, but I think it is going to feel faster. I think that the distance between the peaks and valleys seems like it's getting less. So
Yeah.
I don't think we're looking at decades long cycles anymore. I think we're looking at like 3 and 4 year cycles.
Yeah.
And
It seems like such a different cycle because it's I mean, a lot of it was caused by the pandemic, and it seems like we should be bouncing out of this, but it seems like there's a lot of anchors holding us back.
there's a long tail, you know. I mean, you know this, we've talked beforehand, but I'll share with your audience, right? To even kind of personalize it. Well, when the pandemic first hit, right, and I felt personally powerless over so many things, right? It's like, whoa, what's going on? And the way I kept my brain busy was thinking through, well, what's the long tail change that comes from this, right? What are the broader implications across the board? And thinking about issues with supply chain and localization and yada yada yada, yada, right? All those things. And I think a lot of that's materialized, and it drove us to buy a farm last year. We moved our farm to a small farm because of that long tail of disruption, right? That was going to just continue out of that. And disruption also means innovation, right? Disruption doesn't just mean everything's crazy. It also means people are responding and creating new stuff to deal with new opportunities and new challenges. So from that standpoint, it can be exciting. And we looked and thought that there was going to be some really interesting opportunities that would emerge, and some things we didn't want to deal with as a family, and some things we did, and we made adjustments to be positioned to do with those things. And I think that's just what we do as humans, and that's what we have to do as an industry. What we have to do as individual stakeholders in this industry is just make our bets, right? And be ready to ride it out and see what happens. And if things don't always work the way we think they're going to, or when we think they're going to, which is my story, don't be afraid to pivot either. Here's what I know ultimately. There's always a demand for smart people. Smart, good, hardworking people to deliver value. So that skill set is always going to be in demand, period. So we just stay focused on being those people, and everything else it'll work out.
And I hear a lot of those people are going to be meeting in Austin, Texas in a couple of weeks. What I think is one of the funnest events to go to, because it always bends your mind, and it's always like, wow, I never thought of it like that. I just think it's I think the fun thing is sometimes the technology might not necessarily exist yet, but people are thinking about it, and it always drives innovation. So I think it's a great event. Anything else you want to add about IIEX?
Oh man, we could go another 30 minutes if we do that, but I do appreciate the plug. Yes, IIEX North America is happening in just a few weeks in Austin. The actual dates are, I always have to check. The 24th to the 25th. Yep. It's our 10th anniversary. So, and what I will say is that it's some of what I was just up on my soapbox about. We created IIEX because we thought there was a gap in the industry. We thought that the industry needed an event that was focused on networking and the magic that can happen with networking, with a focus on innovation, on creating new stuff, right? And you bring the right people together with supply and demand, and with resources and cool ideas, and good stuff just happens. And for 10 years, that's what we've been doing.
It's great.
Yeah, and we've grown. I mean, it's now, depending on who you ask, but we're somewhere in the top 2 or 3 events in the world now, or in North America, at least from a size standpoint, which I guess is the metric that matters for these things. But I tend to think of getting comments like did you have a good time? Did you make good connections? We keep experimenting with the form factor, yada, yada, yada. We keep trying to innovate and, live up to our name. And it's great. We're thrilled that the industry has seen value in what we deliver. So we hope that people will join us.
This is a great, absolutely great event. Last year I was there with some clients and prospects, and it was fun to see them like talking to other vendors and other companies, and like getting ideas. I mean, literally brainstorming like in real time, probably about stuff they probably shouldn't have been talking about. But it was interesting just that, they kind of had companies had a place to go and like throw out ideas and not get laughed at. hey, how does, how can I use ChatGPT in my world, or how can, what it's going to be kind of a safe place to go and learn. So I'm excited about it.
It will. I think that we may introduce a drinking game every time ChatGPT is introduced. I fear.
I know, yeah. Or
everybody
bingo.
would just be wasted. Yes, maybe bingo would be better than a drinking game, because it's, it's going to be, it is the topic, and rightfully so. It is.
Yeah.
It is an important topic. Not because it's a cool, bright, shiny thing, but because it, it has implications in how we do our job. And so it'll be interesting, but that won't be the only thing talked about. Be lots of other cool stuff. We have lots of stages and lots of different ways for people to engage, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, essentially the conversation reminds me of the days back when the internet research was starting up, and how everybody was like, well, if you want to talk to guys playing video games in their basement, it's a perfect venue, right? Anyway, well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add in our final seconds here?
Well, I don't think so, John. Just thank you. It's honor to be asked to go anywhere, do anything. But particularly from you and InfoTools, you guys are fantastic. You've been great friends and partners for many, many years. So I appreciate being asked to be here. Tell your team to say hello, Horst and everybody else. That's it. So thanks.
Appreciate it. Well, for the listeners out there, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with others, and stay in touch, and we will see you in Austin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.